They say belief gives strength. But belief, when left unexamined, becomes a drug, a sweet poison that dulls the mind and blinds the soul. Every empire that ever fell began with a beautiful lie someone chose to believe. Faith is comfort. It tells the weak that everything will be fine, that the world is fair, that loyalty will be returned in kind. But Machiavelli whispered a darker truth. Faith is the first illusion of power. Those who believe too easily are not enlightened, they are marked. History hides 1,000 examples. A king who trusted his priests. A general who trusted his allies. A lover who trusted a promise whispered in the dark. Each one thought belief was virtue, until belief became the blade. Blind trust begins softly. It wears the voice of kindness and the mask of loyalty. It tells you that suspicion is cruelty, that doubt is sin. And so you silence your instincts, one by one, until the silence grows louder than truth itself. By the time you realize what's been taken from you, it's already too late. Machiavelli understood the sickness of the human heart, the desire to believe even when reason bleeds. He wrote that men are quick to promise because it costs them nothing, and quicker to forget because it serves them everything. To believe blindly, then, is to walk willingly into another man's design. Faith without awareness is not strength, it is surrender dressed as virtue. Those who follow too loyally do not serve greatness, they feed it, until it devours them whole. And those who trust too deeply are not noble, they are merely waiting for betrayal to find them. But every age, every city, every soul needs one believer, someone pure enough to test the cruelty of the world. In Florence, centuries ago, there was such a man. A ruler with the heart of a saint and the mind of a child. He believed that love could bind men stronger than fear, that loyalty could outlast ambition. And for a while, it seemed he was right. But power is a patient beast. It waits behind smiles and kind words. And when belief grows too bright, shadows gather close. This is where his story begins. The story of Leonardo Varin, the gentle prince who believed too much, and paid the price all dreamers pay. Leonardo Varin was born beneath the marble towers of Florence, in an age when art disguised corruption and poets sang to drown the sound of blades. From the moment he took the throne, his people called him the merciful prince. He listened when others commanded, forgave when others punished. He believed mercy was stronger than fear, that if a ruler loved his people, they would never raise their hands against him. And for a time, the city bloomed. Merchants smiled in his courts, soldiers softened their grip on their swords, and even the poor whispered blessings in his name. Leonardo walked among them without guards, smiling as if kindness could build walls. But every heart that adores also hungers. Power, once tasted, never sleeps. Among the prince's most trusted was Giulio Reni, his childhood companion, brilliant, charming, and hungry for more than friendship. Giulio advised him in every matter of state, often speaking before the prince could think. Leonardo saw in him loyalty. Machiavelli would have seen ambition sharpening its edge. "You are my other self, Giulio," Leonardo once said, raising a cup of wine. "Without you, this city would fall to pieces." Giulio smiled, the kind of smile that hides 1,000 calculations. "Then let us pray, my prince," he replied softly, "that I never leave your side." The narrator's voice lowers, calm, surgical. Blind trust is not built overnight, it is woven, thread by thread, through shared victories and quiet flattery. Leonardo mistook reflection for friendship, never realizing that a mirror only returns the face you want to see. Under Giulio's guidance, new taxes were written, new soldiers hired. The prince signed each decree without reading, trusting the hand that placed the quill. At first, the changes seemed small, a coin here, a favor there, but the roots of betrayal grow best in silence. Machiavelli would have smiled at the irony. The prince who ruled by love had already begun to rule by illusion. For power is not taken, it is surrendered, piece by piece, by those too gentle to guard it. One night, as the city slept, Giulio stood alone in the council hall, staring at the empty throne. His reflection shimmered on the polished floor. The moonlight carved his face into halves, loyalty and hunger. He whispered to the throne as if to an old friend, He trusts me as if I were his conscience. Perhaps soon I shall be. The next morning, Leonardo awoke to the sound of church bells, but they rang not for celebration. Somewhere in the city, a loyal merchant had been arrested for treason under Giulio's command. The prince frowned but dismissed the thought. Giulio must have reason, he told himself. And just like that, the first shadow entered his kingdom. For in every story of downfall, there is always a moment too small to notice, the first crack in the crown. At first, Leonardo did not see it. Shadows rarely announce themselves. They slip through the smallest cracks in the heart and the crown alike. He believed the arrest was an act of justice, that Giulio, wise and loyal, had simply acted to protect the peace. But peace without truth is only silence wearing a crown. Days turned into weeks. The city still praised their gentle prince, yet a strange chill followed him wherever he went. Courtiers whispered less, bowing lower, smiling longer. Even his most loyal guards began to avert their eyes when he passed. Something unseen had shifted, not in the city, but in the minds of men. One evening, a letter arrived. It bore no seal, only a single line written in trembling ink. Your friend Giulio feasts with wolves. Leonardo stared at it for hours, unsure whether to laugh or to worry. When he finally showed it to Giulio, the counselor only smiled. Envy breeds lies, my prince. The higher you rise, the more shadows crawl at your feet. And with that, the letter was gone, burned before Leonardo could answer. The narrator's voice grows colder. Denial is not ignorance, it is protection. The mind shields itself from truths too heavy to hold. Machiavelli once wrote that men prefer comforting illusions to painful reality, because the first feeds the heart, and the second feeds only fear. Leonardo was still a believer. He mistook firelight for warmth, not realizing it could burn. The second sign came soon after. A merchant from the northern quarter sought an audience, claiming new taxes were destroying his trade. Leonardo promised relief, unaware that Giulio had doubled the levy in secret. When the merchant vanished a week later, the prince was told it was illness. But Florence was a city where illness often came with daggers. By now, even the palace walls seemed to breathe differently, colder, listening. Leonardo began to dream of footsteps echoing in his hall, of whispers behind curtains, of laughter cut short when he entered the room. Still, he told himself, Giulio is my brother. He serves me as I would serve him. But a brother who holds your trust too tightly can strangle you with it. One night, standing at the balcony overlooking Florence, Leonardo watched the torches flicker across the river. Each light shimmered like a truth trying to survive the darkness. He whispered to himself, Maybe I am losing faith. And from the corridor behind him, a voice replied, soft and sharp. Then you are finally learning. But when Leonardo turned, no one was there. The narrator's tone lowers, a quiet omen. The first crack had formed, not in the marble of his palace, but in the glass of his certainty. And once certainty breaks, it never mends clean again. Trust, once cracked, does not shatter immediately. It leaks, drop by drop, until the soul grows hollow. Leonardo began to notice the small things first. Giulio no longer stood beside him during council meetings. He stood slightly behind. He spoke less like a friend and more like a translator, reshaping Leonardo's words into something colder, sharper, more strategic. The courtiers nodded to Giulio before they bowed to the prince. Even the servants hesitated before meeting Leonardo's eyes. And still, the prince convinced himself that friendship could not rot. He remembered the days when they studied together as boys, sharing stolen bread, laughing under the same sun. But men do not stay boys forever. Ambition ages faster than loyalty. Giulio, Leonardo said one night as they dined alone, the room lit by a single candle. You've grown quiet lately. Giulio smiled faintly. And you've grown uncertain, my prince. Uncertain? Yes, he replied, swirling his wine. You ask questions that once you would have answered yourself? The narrator's tone shifts, slow, deliberate. Machiavelli wrote that when a ruler begins to doubt, his allies begin to calculate. Doubt smells like weakness. It calls to ambition like blood calls to sharks. Leonardo didn't see the trap. He was too focused on saving what was already lost. To prove his faith, he granted Giulio more control over the treasury, over the city guard, even over the letters that bore the royal seal. In trying to keep his friend, he handed him the kingdom. At first, Giulio thanked him with the same soft loyalty as always. But gratitude from the ambitious is only theater. Behind closed doors, Giulio began to rewrite history, whispering that the prince was losing touch, that mercy had softened his reason. And the people listened. Rumors became truths faster than laws could be written. They said the prince had gone mad with guilt, that his nights were haunted by voices, that he had lost the courage to rule. Each lie was a thread in a web Giulio spun with quiet precision. He never shouted rebellion. He spoke it gently, in the tone of concern, in the mask of friendship. "You must rest, Leonardo," he urged one morning. "Let me handle the council while you recover your strength." And Leonardo, exhausted by shadows he couldn't name, simply nodded. The narrator's voice drops, almost whispering. That is how betrayal moves, not as a strike, but as an embrace. It enters through comfort, through the promise of help. The city that once adored the gentle prince now served his friend. His name was still spoken, but with hesitation, like a story from a fading age. And Giulio, ever patient, stood at the center of it all, calm, devoted, dangerous. Machiavelli once said, "He who builds his power on the love of others builds on air." Leonardo was now standing on air, and the wind was changing. That night, as the last candle in his chamber flickered out, the prince whispered, "At least I still have one friend." In the silence that followed, the narrator's voice cuts through, soft as a blade. "Yes, and that is why you will lose everything." The music swells, dark, tense, as the scene fades into the sound of echoing laughter and clinking glasses. The invitation arrived on black parchment sealed with gold, a grand feast to honor the anniversary of Leonardo's reign. The city rejoiced, banners unfurled, and the palace prepared for a night of music and wine. Yet beneath the joy, the air was thick with unspoken tension, like a painting too perfect to be real. Giulio planned every detail himself. The guest list, the music, the seating, even the order of toasts. To the prince, it was an act of devotion. To Giulio, it was architecture, a carefully built stage where power would shift without blood. As the sun fell, the palace shimmered with light. Servants hurried through corridors carrying silver trays. Nobles in jeweled masks arrived whispering compliments coated with deceit. And in the center of it all sat Leonardo, radiant yet uneasy, a man surrounded by his own reflection, unable to tell which faces were real. "Florence has never been more alive," Giulio said, raising his glass. "Because of you, my friend." Leonardo smiled faintly. "Because of us, Giulio. Always us." The counselor's eyes glinted, a flash of something too brief to name. The narrator's tone shifts, a dark melody beneath the words. "Feasts have always been the theater of betrayal. Caesar, strangled by senators. Kings poisoned by their wine. Lovers deceived under chandeliers. Machiavelli wrote that celebrations are the perfect disguise for change, because joy blinds faster than fear." As the music swelled, Leonardo rose to address his people. His voice trembled with emotion. "You have given me your hearts," he said, "and I have given you mine. May our unity never fade." The hall erupted in applause. But among the clapping hands, a few never moved. They simply watched, waiting. At Giulio's subtle signal, guards repositioned near the doors. The laughter grew louder, the music faster, as if to drown out the truth. Wine flowed freely, perhaps too freely. The narrator lowers his voice. Trust turns to poison long before the cup touches the lips. The danger was never in the drink, it was in the silence of those who poured it. Leonardo sat again, the weight of wine and exhaustion heavy upon him. He felt warmth crawl through his veins, a strange numbness pressing at his temples. He turned to Giulio. "Tell me," he whispered, "do you ever tire of my faith?" Giulio's smile did not waver. "Never, my prince." It is the reason I breathe. A servant passed, and Giulio's hand rested briefly over Leonardo's cup, too brief to notice, too casual to question. Moments later, a strange dizziness overtook the prince. The music blurred into echoes, faces twisted into shadows. He tried to rise, but the hall spun. Machiavelli would have seen it clearly, the moment when power leaves one hand and enters another without a scream, without a sword. The room erupted in a toast, Giulio's voice cutting through the chaos. To Florence! To the prince who taught us mercy! The crowd repeated his words, unaware that mercy was dying at that very table. Leonardo's hand trembled. His cup slipped and shattered on the marble floor. The music stopped. All eyes turned to him, the gentle prince, pale and dazed beneath the golden light. He whispered something no one could hear, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a farewell, before the guards gently lifted him from his seat and led him away. No accusation, no protest, only obedience. The perfect coup is not loud, it is polite. The narrator's tone turns grave. That night, the city of Florence did not witness murder or rebellion. It witnessed transition, the quiet death of innocence, disguised as ceremony. The people cheered outside the palace, thinking their prince was resting. And Giulio, standing at the window above them, raised his glass once more, alone this time. Long live the mercy that makes men weak, he whispered. The candlelight flickered over his face, half golden, half shadow, the lion and the fox reborn in one man. When morning came, Florence was silent. The palace gates were closed, the banners still hung, but the air had changed, heavier, colder, more obedient. The people were told their prince had fallen ill. The council assured them all was well. But beneath the calm surface, the city had already bowed to a new master. Leonardo awoke in his private chamber, his head heavy, his thoughts slow and fragmented. The scent of incense filled the room, masking something metallic beneath. At his bedside stood Giulio, smiling, composed, and dressed in mourning black. You fainted, my prince, Giulio said gently. The physicians say exhaustion. You've given too much of yourself. Leonardo tried to speak, but his throat burned. How long? Only a day, Giulio replied, pouring water into a cup. Rest. I will handle the affairs of the city until you recover. It sounded like devotion. It was, in truth, declaration. Machiavelli once wrote that power rarely needs violence, it needs only vacancy. When one man hesitates, another steps forward, and the world accepts the replacement as natural. Giulio didn't steal the throne. Leonardo handed it to him in weakness. Outside, decrees were issued under the prince's seal, all signed by Giulio. The royal guard now answered to his voice, the council pledged loyalty to his vision. And yet the city remained calm. No rebellion, no resistance, only adjustment. The narrator's tone darkens. That is the genius of a quiet coup, it convinces everyone that nothing has changed. Only when it is too late do they realize that everything has. Leonardo tried to rise one evening, demanding to see his council. The guards, men he had known since youth, refused to meet his eyes. Orders from Lord Giulio, one murmured, his voice trembling. You must remain within the palace. Leonardo stared at them, not with anger, but disbelief. His power was gone, yet his heart refused to accept it. He wrote a letter that night, a plea to his people, a call for truth, but no messenger ever left the gates. In the morning, Giulio entered with calm finality. Florence needs peace, he said softly. Your rest has become the kingdom's strength. You mean my silence? Leonardo whispered. Giulio smiled. Silence and peace often wear the same face. The narrator speaks like a judge delivering a sentence. And so it ended, not with a sword, not with blood, but with agreement. The gentle prince became a prisoner of his own mercy, and the friend he trusted became the ruler he created. Outside, the bells rang for stability. Inside, the last candle of innocence burned low. Leonardo watched its flame until it died, whispering to the darkness. At least they still believe in me. The darkness replied, cold and absolute. Only because they don't know you're gone. They said the prince had chosen solitude, that he wished to rest beyond the noise of the city. But exile rarely begins with choice. Leonardo Varin left Florence under a cloudless sky, escorted by guards who refused to meet his gaze. His departure was quiet, almost ceremonial, as if the city wished to forget him without the discomfort of mourning. The carriage carried him south through dust and vineyards until the marble towers of Florence were only ghosts on the horizon. He did not cry. He did not rage. He simply stared at his reflection in the window, wondering when his face had grown so unfamiliar. The narrator's voice returns, low, reflective. Defeat does not always arrive with destruction. Sometimes it comes as stillness, the moment you realize the world continues perfectly without you. Machiavelli once wrote that men learn wisdom only after they lose the illusion of safety. Leonardo, at last, was beginning to see. He settled in a small villa by the sea, where the waves crash like memories against the shore. Days passed in silence, nights in thought. He began to write, not decrees or laws, but reflections. Wounds turned into words, pain into philosophy. He studied himself as if dissecting a stranger. I was betrayed, he wrote. Not because I was good, but because I was blind. Mercy without understanding is not virtue, it is vanity. Each line became a confession, each confession a mirror. He saw not the victim of treachery, but the architect of his own downfall. The narrator's tone sharpens. When a man loses everything, he meets the truth stripped of mercy. Leonardo realized that trust had been his addiction. He had believed in people because he feared the emptiness of doubt. And in doing so, he had handed his crown to those who understood fear better than he ever could. Years passed. His hair silvered, his voice deepened, and the gentle prince became something else, something quieter, but infinitely sharper. The city's name still haunted his dreams, but no longer as pain, as study. He watched the waves one evening and whispered, "They all betrayed me." But his reflection in the window, older, wiser, merciless, whispered back, "No. You betrayed yourself first." The narrator's tone lowers, soft yet final. From that moment, Leonardo was no longer the Prince of Florence, he became the student of its ruin. He no longer sought vengeance or forgiveness. Only understanding. And when understanding finally came, it carried a single realization. Power never leaves the world. It merely changes hands, waiting for the one patient enough to reclaim it. The wind rose outside, rattling the shutters. Leonardo closed his journal and looked toward the north, toward Florence. In his eyes burned something the sea could not wash away. Leonardo returned not as a prince, but as a ghost wrapped in patience. He came quietly, at dawn, when Florence still slept under the weight of its own secrets. The gates that once opened with fanfare now creaked for a traveler no one recognized. Yet in his eyes burned the same city he had lost, only colder, clearer. Machiavelli wrote, "Men forget the death of their fathers sooner than the loss of their property." Leonardo had learned this well. Florence had not mourned him, it had simply moved on. Its new rulers, the Council of Virtue, preached morality while draining the city's veins. But corruption, like rot, never sleeps long beneath the paint of piety. He walked the narrow streets cloaked in gray, unseen among the merchants and beggars. Every stone, every whisper of the marketplace, carried memory. Here he had laughed. There he had been betrayed. Now, he walked as the shadow of his former self, neither prince nor exile, but something in between. He found refuge in an abandoned monastery on the city's edge. By night, candlelight flickered through its broken windows, and whispers began to spread. The ghost of Florence has returned. But he did not seek revenge. Not yet. Revenge was the tool of the desperate. He was no longer desperate, he was deliberate. The narrator's tone deepens, calm, analytical, dangerous. Power, he had learned, does not need titles. It needs timing. And patience, sharpened by pain, becomes the deadliest weapon of all. Leonardo began to visit old allies, not openly, but as a rumor. He offered no promises, only truths. Men who once betrayed him now listened in silence, unnerved by his composure. It wasn't anger that frightened them, it was understanding. One night, under the cloister's arches, he met Matteo, his former adviser, the same man who had signed his exile. The dialogue cuts like steel. "You're supposed to be dead," Matteo whispered. "So are you," Leonardo replied. "But some ghosts never rest." He leaned close, his voice a blade wrapped in silk. "The council will fall. Not by blood, not by rebellion, but by belief. Their own belief. This same disease that destroyed me will destroy them." Matteo trembled. "You're not the same man." Leonardo smiled faintly. "No. I am what your betrayal made of me." The narrator's voice turns reflective. It was no longer about reclaiming a throne. It was about reclaiming truth, the kind that burns illusions to ash. He left the monastery that night with a single candle, its flame steady despite the wind. The city lights flickered below, unaware that its old heart had begun to beat again, colder, wiser, unstoppable. Leonardo moved through the morning mist like a memory refusing to fade. The monastery behind him stood empty now. Only the wax-stripped altar and a single extinguished candle marked his absence. He had waited long enough. The time for patience had ended. The narrator's tone steadies, slow, deliberate. Power reclaims itself not through violence, but through inevitability. Leonardo no longer sought revenge. He sought restoration of balance, a truth long buried beneath kindness and deceit. The council of virtue had grown complacent. Their feasts were grander, their sermons louder, their eyes duller. They had built their rule not on strength, but on illusion, the illusion that righteousness is the same as wisdom. Leonardo had once believed that too. That belief had destroyed him. He entered the palazzo under disguise during the festival of renewal. Masks glimmered beneath golden chandeliers, laughter drowned the hum of fear. How fitting, he thought, betrayal wearing the face of celebration. He moved unseen through the crowd, his gaze steady, watching faces he once trusted, Matteo, now hollow-eyed, Lucia, the council's darling, and Cardinal Sforza, the puppet master who had pulled the strings of his exile. Each of them smiled with polished grace, unaware that the shadow they had buried now walked among them. But Leonardo did not strike. He watched. He waited for belief, the same poison that had once blinded him, to work its way through them. At the height of the night, the cardinal stood to toast. To virtue, the only crown a man can wear without blood. The hall roared in approval. But as the goblets rose, the wine began to shimmer, then darken. Matteo's hands trembled. Lucia gasped. The cardinal's eyes widened in dawning horror. The narrator whispers. It was not poison, not yet. It was realization. Leonardo stepped from the crowd, mask in hand. His voice cut through the noise like ice. You speak of virtue as if it were armor. But it is only cloth, easily torn. Gasps rippled through the hall. Some recognized him, others thought him a ghost. He approached the cardinal slowly, eyes unwavering. Do you remember what you taught me, Eminence? That faith makes men obedient, that trust makes them weak? Yes, the cardinal rasped. Then tonight I teach you the cost of that lesson. The cardinal staggered, not from poison but from the weight of truth. For weeks, Leonardo had fed the council's paranoia, whispering secrets through the same mouths that once whispered against him. He hadn't needed to spill blood, they had done it themselves, turning on each other in silent dread. By the time the guards entered, the hall was chaos. Allies accused allies, lovers exposed lovers. Belief, the same blind faith that once unified them, now devoured them whole. Leonardo stood among the ruins of their certainty and spoke softly. Men betray for power. But the greatest betrayal is within, when a man believes his goodness will protect him from the world. The narrator's tone deepens, almost mournful. That was the lesson Machiavelli had written in every line of The Prince, not cruelty, but clarity. To understand evil is not to become it, it is to defend oneself from its disguise. Leonardo left the palace before dawn. Behind him, Florence trembled with the echo of revelation. He walked to the riverbank, where the first light touched the water. In its reflection, he no longer saw the gentle prince or the vengeful ghost, only a man who had finally learned to see. "I was betrayed," he whispered. "But not by them. I was betrayed by the part of me that believed they wouldn't." The wind carried the words away, soft as absolution. The narrator concludes, voice fading into stillness. The final lesson was not about trust or power, it was about awareness. And awareness, once gained, can never be undone.